I showed up early because I didn't want to run into anyone before the service started. The funeral home sat on a quiet street in Nevada, the kind of place where the carpet never changes and the air smells like someone cleaned too hard about 20 minutes before you walked in. I hadn't been inside a place like this since basic training sent me to one ceremony after another, but this one felt different because it was for the only person in my family who ever treated me like I wasn't optional. Aunt Lorraine deserved better than the Carter family parade that was about to come through the front doors. I stood near the sign-in table and picked up the printed program. Whoever designed it kept it simple. Her photo, her dates, a short line about her kindness. My eyes went straight to the part listing immediate family attendees. They didn't list me as Elena Carter. They listed me exactly how I'd asked. Major Elena Grace Monroe. Seeing the name in print didn't shock me anymore. I'd been using it for months. I'd signed paperwork with it. I'd run squad briefings with it. The IRS recognized me faster than my own mother ever did, which honestly felt fitting. But seeing it right there, on a funeral program surrounded by the Carter name, had a different kind of weight. I wasn't here to make a statement. I wasn't here to get attention. I was here because Aunt Lorraine deserved someone who showed up without conditions. The doors behind me opened, and I didn't have to turn around to know it was them. My family has a very distinct entrance style, somewhere between mall walkers with attitude and people who think the world is a revolving door for their convenience. My mother spotted me first. She froze mid-stride like someone had unplugged her. Her eyes dropped to the program in her hands. She blinked once, twice, then lifted her head again, staring at me the way someone looks at a car they swear they parked in a different spot. You changed your name. Her voice wasn't soft or confused. It had that sharp, disappointed tone she reserved for grocery stores that ran out of her favorite yogurt. My father came up behind her, squinting at the program like the words might rearrange themselves if he stared hard enough. My sister, Madeline, was the last to walk in. She didn't freeze. She didn't gasp. She didn't even look shocked. She looked offended like I had personally staged this funeral just to inconvenience her. She scanned the room, saw no one important was watching, and marched toward me with the confidence of someone who's never been held accountable for anything in her life. "What is this?" she asked, waving the program as if the paper itself had committed a crime. "You're going by Monroe now?" I kept my voice steady. "That's my legal name." Madeline laughed once, a short, irritated exhale. "Oh please, you're being dramatic. And you didn't think to tell anyone?" There were about 14 ways I could have answered that, but I chose the simplest one. "You didn't think to show up to the most important day of my career, so I assumed communication wasn't really our family's thing." Her jaw twitched. She hated when I didn't play my assigned role. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice like we were about to break into state secrets. "Why would you do something like this? And here, of all places." "I didn't do anything here," I said. "I just showed up. Something I know is hard for you all." My father shifted uncomfortably, like the carpet had suddenly become unstable terrain. Madeline looked like she had a monologue ready to go, and none of it would contain self-reflection. She opened her mouth probably to explain why everything in my life was my fault when the funeral director gently signaled everyone to take their seats. My family hesitated, waiting to see whether I'd follow them. I didn't move. I sat on the opposite side of the aisle, not because I wanted distance, but because distance had already been there long before I changed my name. Lorraine always sat with me at family events when she noticed I'd been left behind. She'd pat my knee and whisper something like, "Some people are born loud. Some people are born busy. Some people are born kind. Don't confuse the first two for the last one." She had a soft way of saying things brutally. The service began. People got up to speak. Stories were shared. None of them surprised me. Lorraine was steady, present, kind in a quiet, intentional way, the opposite of everyone sitting in the front row with my last name attached to theirs. Every so often, my mother turned around and looked at me like I was a loose thread she suddenly noticed on a sweater she'd worn for years. My father shifted, uncomfortable, probably trying to imagine explaining this name change to his golf friends. Madeline kept checking her phone, pretending she wasn't bothered. She was absolutely bothered. When the service ended, I stepped outside before the crowd moved. The air was cool and clear. I barely made it halfway down the walkway before I heard my name, not my new one. Of course, because that would require awareness. "Elena," my mother called. We need to talk about this. I turned. They were approaching like a group summoned for an intervention they didn't prepare for. There's nothing to talk about, I said. I'm here for Lorraine. That's it. My mother shook her head. Changing your name. Leaving. All of this. It's extreme. Madeline stepped forward, crossing her arms like she was auditioning for the role of disappointed sibling number 1. This started because of that promotion ceremony, she said. You're still hung up on that? Really? The way she said it, dismissive, bored, annoyed, hit the exact nerve she meant it to. I didn't react. I didn't need to. She had no idea how much she was revealing about herself in that one careless sentence, and the best part was, she genuinely believed she had the moral high ground. I met her stare, calm and steady. You have no idea where this started. And I could see on her face, she didn't. She truly had no idea what that day cost me, or how much she played a part in it, or how long the damage had been piling up long before anyone in that building forgot anything on purpose. I didn't walk away yet. There was more to say, more to unravel, more to finally acknowledge, and none of it was going to wait for another day. The moment hung there between us, and it pulled me straight back to the years when getting ignored wasn't a decision I made, it was just the default setting of my life. Standing there outside the funeral home, the same feeling crept in, the one I used to get as a kid whenever the room shifted toward my sister like she was the sun, and the rest of us were supposed to be grateful just to orbit her. I learned pretty early that in the Carter house, attention wasn't something you earned. It was something Madeline absorbed whether she did anything or not. She'd walk into a room and the whole atmosphere changed, like everyone else had been waiting for her to show up so they could decide what to care about that day. I didn't resent her for existing just for consuming all the oxygen in the place, without even noticing. The funny part is, nothing dramatic ever happened to make me feel invisible. It wasn't a single moment where someone said something cruel. It was quieter than that. More consistent. The kind of pattern you don't catch until you're old enough to realize other families operate differently. Take birthdays. Mine were always the warm-up act for hers. If my birthday fell near one of her recitals, the conversation switched to her show before we even cut the cake. If I got a gift, she'd get a just because gift 5 minutes later. At 8 years old, you internalize things like that fast. You stop expecting attention, because expecting it just sets you up to be disappointed. School events were even worse. One year I made it into the regional science fair. I built a model demonstrating basic hydraulic pressure, nothing fancy, but I was proud of it. The fair was on a Saturday morning. My mom drove me, walked me in, and left because Madeline had a cheerleading rehearsal, and apparently, no one else on the squad could possibly exist until she arrived. When I won second place in my category, I held the ribbon the whole ride home. No one asked about it. It ended up in a drawer until I finally tossed it before leaving for basic training. Madeline, meanwhile, could sneeze at school and somehow my parents would get a letter home praising her lung function. She joined cheerleading, choir, theater, a club about reading to puppies, I'm not kidding. That was a real thing and every single one became a family production. New outfits, carpool schedules, dinner celebrations. I didn't even get that much reaction when I made honor roll 3 semesters in a row. My mom said, "That's nice, honey," then immediately asked Madeline if she needed help picking shoes for her performance. It wasn't that they hated me. Hate requires intention. They just didn't register me unless I forced myself into the frame. And I never liked the way it felt to fight for space that was supposed to be mine by default. The only person who seemed to notice was Aunt Lorraine. She'd send me postcards from wherever she was visiting, with little notes reminding me that the world was bigger than our house and that people who listened were out there. Once, when she found me in the kitchen cleaning up after a family dinner, she asked why I always did everything quietly. I told her it was easier that way. She shook her head and said, "Don't shrink for people who refuse to look up." I didn't understand the weight of that line until much later. There was one memory that stuck harder than the rest. I was 12, and our school held a small ceremony for academic awards. Nothing huge, but they invited families. I told my parents about it a week in advance. They nodded. I reminded them the night before. They nodded again. The morning of, I put on the one dress my grandmother sent me the year before. It was simple and a little too big, but it made me feel put together. They didn't show. When I got home, I found them in the living room helping Madeline glue rhinestones onto a costume for shockingly another performance. I stood there with my certificate in my hand. Madeline didn't even look up. My dad said something about traffic, and my mom said the ceremony must have been short anyway. They didn't ask how it went. They didn't ask what I won. They didn't notice the certificate sitting on the counter until days later, and even then my mom just said, "Oh, right, that thing." I learned a lot from that moment, mostly that absence makes more noise than presence ever will. By the time high school rolled around, I had mastered the art of being low maintenance. I drove myself to everything. I packed my own lunches, did my own projects, applied to programs no one in my family could name. While Madeline and my parents rotated their lives around her latest hobby, I figured out how to take up as little space as possible. It felt safer, predictable. What people don't understand about being invisible is that it doesn't happen overnight. You don't wake up one day and say, "I guess no one sees me." It's a slow fade. You stop expecting praise. You stop expecting support. You stop expecting awareness. Eventually, you stop expecting anything at all, and that becomes the part that sticks. Losing hope quietly is still losing it. There were moments when I thought maybe it would change. When I got my learner's permit, I thought my dad would take me driving. He didn't. He was too busy going over rehearsal schedules with Madeline. When I got into AP Physics, I thought my mom might brag to someone. She didn't. But she did show everyone a video of Madeline singing half a verse at a school talent show. A shaky, off-key performance somehow became a family treasure. I don't blame my sister for being the center of attention. That wasn't her fault. What she did with that power later, though, that was a different story. But in those early years, she was just the kid who always assumed things would go her way, because they always did. The difference between us was simple. She expected people to show up. I expected nothing. The gap between those two expectations became the story of our lives, and it followed me long after I left that house. Standing outside the funeral home brought all of that back with a clarity I didn't ask for. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't longing. It was more like recognizing an old bruise you forgot you had until someone pressed the exact spot with perfect accuracy. I didn't flinch, but the memory settled in with the kind of precision only family history can deliver. I didn't walk away from them because of one event. I walked away because, after decades of being treated like a footnote, I finally realized I didn't have to keep playing the role they wrote for me. That understanding didn't hit me at the funeral, or at my graduation, or even at my promotion. It built slowly, stacked piece by piece, until the weight shifted enough that moving became the only logical choice. And long before I ever changed my name, long before I ever disappeared, I had already figured out exactly how to escape a family that forgets you even when you're standing right in front of them. The first time the idea of leaving really felt possible was during junior year of high school, when a recruiter visited our campus. Most students were interested in the free keychains and the promise of skipping a math period. I paid attention because he talked about structure, purpose, and the kind of environment where showing up actually mattered. He mentioned travel, training, benefits, and the chance to build a life that didn't depend on someone else deciding you were worth the effort. That last part stuck with me more than anything. At home, the atmosphere was the same predictable rotation of Madeline-centered updates. My mom had picked up a part-time job just to help pay for travel costs for some cheer competition. My dad was coordinating carpool schedules like he was managing a Fortune 500 company. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out how to pay college application fees on my own. When I brought up the military brochure at dinner, my parents acted like I'd said I wanted to become a magician. My mom asked why I'd want to do something so extreme. My dad shrugged and said, "If that's what you want," in the same tone he used when I suggested switching toothpaste brands. Madeline barely looked up from her phone. "You? In the military?" She smirked, like the punchline wrote itself. "You'd have to talk to people." I let the comment slide, mainly because responding would have required more energy than she was worth at the time. But something inside me clicked. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. I realized that if I stayed in that house, I'd spend the rest of my life shrinking to fit the space they left for me. And that space was getting smaller by the year. The day I turned 18, I met with the recruiter again. He didn't give me a speech about patriotism or legacy. He just laid out the facts: job guarantees, technical training, tuition assistance, housing. It was the closest thing to a roadmap I'd ever seen. I signed the initial paperwork the following week. My parents didn't object, but they didn't support it either. My mom asked how long basic training lasted. My dad asked whether I'd be home for Christmas. Madeline asked if she could have my room when I left. The thing about leaving for basic training is that everyone talks like it's a huge emotional event. For some families, it probably is. For mine, the drive to the airport felt like dropping someone off at a dentist appointment. My mom hugged me like she was testing the temperature of a pool she didn't intend to swim in. My dad gave a half smile and a generic, "Good luck." Madeline didn't bother coming. She was getting her nails done for a senior formal. I didn't cry. I didn't feel abandoned. I already understood that you can't lose support you never had in the first place. Basic training hit me like a wall, but it was a predictable wall. People yelled, people ran, people messed up, people learned fast. Nothing about it felt personal, and that alone made it easier than living at home. No one ignored you because of your sister. No one compared you to another recruit who could do cartwheels. You were judged on whether you did your job, and the bar was the same for everybody. For the first time in my life, effort actually translated into results. If you paid attention, you got better. If you followed instructions, you moved forward. If you worked hard, someone noticed. It didn't matter where you came from or who your family was. I liked that more than I expected. After basic, I trained for aircraft maintenance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was precise, structured, and required attention to detail 3 things I'd always been good at, even if no one recognized it. I learned how to troubleshoot, how to lead a small team, how to operate on almost no sleep, and how to keep moving when everything around you felt heavy. The work made sense to me in a way my childhood never did. My first deployment came sooner than I thought. When the assignment came down for Qatar, most of us reacted with the mix of nerves and excitement you'd expect. My parents reacted with mild concern only after I told them I'd be gone for months. My mom asked what weather to expect over there. My dad asked if I could video call on Sundays. Neither of them asked if I was scared or ready or proud. Madeline didn't ask anything. She just sent a text saying, "Don't die lol," followed by 2 emojis she thought were funny. The deployment itself wasn't dramatic. It was long days, longer nights, and a lot of work that nobody outside the job would ever fully understand. But being overseas made everything back home feel like it belonged to a different timeline. The distance didn't hurt, it relieved something I didn't know needed relieving. I made friends. Real ones. People who didn't know anything about the Carter household. There was Rachel, who somehow managed to complain about everything and still be good at her job. There was Tyler, the kind of guy who made jokes even when there was nothing funny about the situation. They became the closest thing I'd ever had to siblings, which is ironic considering the one I was actually related to barely remembered I existed unless she needed something. When Tyler died in a training accident, it was the first time loss hit me in a way I couldn't detach from. He wasn't just another name. He was someone I worked with, joked with, trusted. His death wasn't heroic or cinematic. It was sudden, brutal, real. And for the first time, I understood how fragile the whole system really was. I didn't tell my parents right away. When I did, my mom said she was sorry and asked if I'd mailed a birthday card to Madeline. My dad told me to hang in there. Madeline didn't respond at all. I remember staring at my phone, realizing that the people who should have mattered didn't, and the people who actually mattered couldn't be replaced. When my deployment ended, I came back changed in ways I didn't try to explain. You can't summarize months of stress, loss, and responsibility to people who think the biggest crisis in their week is running out of almond milk. I got my promotion to captain not long after, and sent the news home. My mom replied with, "That's nice, dear." My dad sent a thumbs up. Madeline wrote, "Congrats, I guess." It landed exactly the way everything from them always did. Flat, distant, like I was reporting from someone else's life. By then, the distance between us wasn't emotional. It was logical. Every step I took away from that house made sense. Every accomplishment I earned on my own felt cleaner, without their fingerprints on it. I wasn't angry about it. Anger requires energy, and I learned to save mine for things that mattered. The Air Force didn't fix my childhood. It didn't make me forget anything. What it did was show me that I wasn't the person my family decided I was. I could lead. I could endure. I could succeed without anyone cheering for me. Maybe especially without anyone cheering for me. And nothing clarified that better than the moment the next big opportunity came my way. The one promotion that would prove once and for all whether my family had ever actually seen me or just walked right past without noticing. The promotion board results came through on a Tuesday morning, the kind of day where everything feels routine until it suddenly isn't. I was sitting in the office reviewing maintenance reports when my commander walked in with a grin that gave it away before he said anything. I'd made major. It wasn't a surprise, not exactly. But it still hit me in a way that felt different from any other promotion. This one wasn't just about rank. It was proof of years of work, deployments, late nights, responsibility, and showing up even when no one else did. It was the kind of milestone people tell their families about with pride. I sent the news home that same afternoon. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Just a simple message. I've been selected for promotion to major. Ceremony in 6 months. I'll send details soon. My mom responded with, "Oh wow, that's nice." My dad said, "Congrats, kiddo." Neither of them asked what the role meant or how hard it was to get there. Madeline wrote, "Good for you," which was basically her way of saying, "I'm acknowledging this so I don't look like the bad guy later." I didn't expect a parade, I didn't expect enthusiasm. But I did expect something. A question. A follow-up. Basic curiosity. Some sign that what mattered to me mattered a little to them. Nothing came. I sent the ceremony date a few weeks later. I followed up with the location, time, dress code, all of it. It wasn't complicated. Show up. Sit in a chair. Clap when my name is called. Eat the cake afterward. This wasn't a wedding. It wasn't a marathon. It was a seating assignment with a handshake. They managed to attend countless performances, recitals, and award nights for Madeline that required more logistical coordination and emotional labor than my entire career combined. Showing up for me didn't seem like a high bar. But tension started building the second Madeline realized this event didn't revolve around her. She called me out of nowhere, using that slightly condescending tone she saved for moments when she wanted to pretend she cared. "So, your thing is the same month as my engagement party," she said. "Your engagement party is 3 weeks earlier," I reminded her. "Right, but there's planning, and fittings, and people will be flying in." I paused, mostly because I couldn't tell if she genuinely believed this was a scheduling conflict or if she was performing confusion for fun. "My ceremony is one afternoon," I said. "It's not the whole month." She huffed, which was her signature move when the world failed to reorganize itself around her timeline. "Well, I'll see what we can do," she said, which translated to, "I already know what we're going to do. I'm just pretending this is a discussion." A week later, an invitation went out to our extended family. A huge engagement party. One single date. The exact day of my promotion. I found out from a cousin who messaged me saying congratulations and asking whether I'd be attending the party. I stared at the screen long enough to confirm it wasn't a typo. Same day. Same time. Same window of the calendar I had given them months earlier. I didn't call Madeline. I already knew the script. She'd claim she forgot. She'd insist the venue only had one date left in the entire state. She'd imply that military ceremonies happen all the time, as if promotions to major were available on a punch card after 9 oil changes. My parents didn't call either. They just quietly RSVP'd to her event. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive sense. It was more like watching someone break something of yours in slow motion while making direct eye contact, then acting surprised when you noticed the pieces on the floor. The message wasn't subtle. It wasn't even personal. This was how things had always worked. Madeline made a decision, and my parents followed it. I was background noise. Rachel noticed the shift in my mood a few days later. We were grabbing coffee before a briefing when she asked if everything was okay. I told her the truth because she'd earned that kind of honesty. "My family's skipping my promotion," I said. She blinked. "Skipping? Like accidentally?" "No," I said. "On purpose. They're going to my sister's party instead." "The party she scheduled on your date?" "Yep." She stared at me, then shook her head. "Your sister sounds like she's one malfunction away from starring in her own reality show." I laughed, but it wasn't really funny, mostly because it was too accurate. My commander, Colonel Brooks, asked if I had family coming. I didn't lie. I just said the travel might not work out for them. He nodded the way people nod when they understand more than you're willing to say out loud. If there was one thing the military taught me, it was how to keep moving with or without an audience. As the ceremony got closer, the reminders from my family became more absurd. My mom called to ask if there would be food. When I said yes, she sighed like that somehow complicated things. My dad asked if he needed to bring anything, as if promotions were potlucks. Madeline didn't contact me at all. She was too busy posting about her perfect engagement journey and her once-in-a-lifetime celebration. Phrases she repeated so often I was convinced she practiced them in the mirror. The night before my promotion, I checked my phone one last time. No messages. No change of plans. No. Hey, we worked it out. They'd made their choice, and they didn't even consider it a choice. They assumed I'd understand. They assumed I'd adapt. They assumed I'd be fine standing alone in a room full of people who had families that actually noticed their accomplishments. The next morning, I put on my uniform and adjusted the insignia one last time. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't see someone abandoned or overlooked. I saw someone who had built everything she had from scratch without applause, without support, without the safety net everyone else took for granted. Family drama doesn't become a revenge story because of one dramatic betrayal. It happens when small things stack high enough that the final piece lands with perfect clarity. Madeline didn't sabotage my promotion because she hated me. She sabotaged it because she never thought I was someone worth prioritizing, and my parents agreed by default, which they were very good at. Nothing about that morning surprised me, not really. What caught me off guard was how calm I felt. The decision they made was so predictable it almost felt rehearsed, and if there's one thing being the invisible sibling teaches you, it's how to stop expecting a plot twist that isn't coming. I left my barracks and headed toward the ceremony hall without checking my phone again. There was no point. I already knew exactly who would be in the audience and exactly who wouldn't, and I walked through those doors knowing that whatever happened inside, the real shift had already begun long before anyone said my name. Walking into the promotion hall felt almost surreal. Mostly because everyone else seemed to have come straight out of a recruitment commercial. Families were piling in with flowers, balloons, cameras, homemade signs, and the kind of coordinated outfits people wear when they actually enjoy being seen together. Every row had clusters of parents, siblings, spouses, kids bouncing in their seats like caffeinated rubber balls. The room buzzed with the sort of excitement that comes from shared pride. Then there was my row. Neat. Empty. Perfectly untouched, like no one had ever intended to sit there in the first place. I didn't dwell on it. You learn to walk past an empty chair the same way you walk past every time someone forgets something important about you. It registers, but you don't stop moving for it. Colonel Brooks gave me a quick nod when I entered. He wasn't the overly sentimental type, but even he did a subtle double-take when he saw the vacant seats behind my name card. He didn't say anything, which I appreciated. A lesser leader would have tried filling the silence with sympathy. Brooks understood the power of shutting up at the right time. The ceremony started on schedule. The MC ran through the usual opening remarks, accomplishments, responsibilities of leadership, expectations for officers stepping into higher roles. I listened, but half my brain wandered. Not because I was emotional, because I was mentally calculating whether my family had even bothered pretending to check traffic before driving to Madeline's party. My turn came. Captain Elena Carter, the MC announced, though it was technically the last time I'd hear the Carter part in a formal setting. Applause filled the room, sincere and warm, except from the row behind me where only air responded. Rachel cheered louder than necessary because she knew exactly what she was doing. The rest of my team joined in. It was enough. More than enough, honestly. I stepped up, shook hands, and stood at attention as Colonel Brooks pinned the gold oak leaf onto my uniform. The insignia was small but symbolic, years of effort distilled into a piece of metal that represented trust, responsibility, and a very real shift in what people expected from me. Brooks leaned in quietly as he finished fastening the pin. "You earned this," he said. "Don't let anyone minimize that." It wasn't a dramatic movie moment. It was simple, direct, and exactly the kind of acknowledgement that lands deeper because it doesn't try too hard. The photographer snapped pictures. People clapped again. I smiled the way officers smile when they know cameras are pointed at them. I glanced once more toward the empty seats, not searching for anyone, just confirming reality. Some truths feel sharper when they're visual. After the ceremony, Everyone gathered for refreshments. Families took photos under the base banner. Parents hugged their kids like they'd personally carried them through basic training. I stood with my team because that was the closest thing I had to a family there. Rachel threw an arm over my shoulder. "You look like someone who could use 3 cookies and a beer," she said. "They don't serve beer at these things." "That's why I said 3 cookies. It's called adapting." She handed me a plate before I could argue. While I tried to decide whether coconut macaroons counted as emotional support food, a fellow officer approached. His parents were mid-photo session behind him, both wearing matching t-shirts with his face on them. "No family today?" he asked casually. Not in a pitying way, more in an, "I'm trying to make conversation" way. "Nope," I said. "They had a scheduling conflict." He nodded like that was normal enough. "Well, congrats anyway. You nailed it." People kept coming up to shake my hand, take photos, ask questions about my next assignment. Every interaction confirmed what I had suspected for years. Support is easy to find when people actually want to show it. By the time I headed back to my dorm, my phone buzzed with a notification, a message from my mother. I already knew what it would say before I opened it. Something clipped, something polite, something meant to look supportive if anyone ever scrolled through the conversation later. "Congratulations on your ceremony today. We wish we could have been there, but the venue for Madeline's party couldn't change the date. Hope it was still special. Still special. Like the presence of your only immediate family is a garnish, not an ingredient." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Their choice was clear, and for once, I wasn't interested in softening it with excuses on their behalf. A few minutes later, another buzz. This time from Madeline. "Sorry we missed your thing. Mom said you looked nice though. The engagement party was amazing. Everyone came. And never Dean." Of course everyone came. Her world always filled the seats. I put my phone face down on the table and stared at the uniform hanging inside my locker. The gold oak leaf glinted under the overhead light. It felt earned, deserved, unattached to the Carter brand. That was the moment the shift happened, not a dramatic snap, not an explosion of anger. Just a quiet, controlled recognition that I didn't owe them endless attempts at connection. They chose their priorities, I could choose mine too. I packed up my notes, straightened the room, and sat for a moment. There was no rage, no meltdown, no cinematic breakdown. Just clarity, a clean, sharp understanding of what came next and why it no longer scared me. If a family can forget your biggest milestone on purpose, then letting go of them isn't abandonment, it's alignment. I stood, took a slow breath, and felt a certainty that had been building for years finally settle into place without fanfare. The future wasn't something I needed permission for, not from them, not anymore. Leaving the promotion hall, I felt oddly steady, like my mind had finally synced with something it had been circling for years. Nothing dramatic happened after the ceremony. No meltdown, no impulsive decisions, no angry voicemails. Just a long walk back to my room and a quiet confirmation that whatever tie had held me to my family had worn thin enough to snap without making a sound. I changed out of my uniform, hung it carefully the way we're trained to, and sat at my desk. The room was silent except for the hum of the air system, predictable and controlled. I liked that about the military. Things functioned the way they were supposed to, unlike most of the people I grew up with. My phone was still face down where I'd left it, and I didn't bother flipping it over. The messages would still be pointless an hour from now, or tomorrow, or 6 months later when Madeline inevitably tried to turn this into something she could blame on me. Ignoring them wasn't revenge. Ignoring them was oxygen. I opened my laptop instead. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but my fingers already knew the path. I typed, "Oregon name change process." Not because I'd made the decision yet, but because I wanted to see what would happen if I did. What showed up wasn't dramatic. It was a simple set of steps, straightforward, procedural, the kind of instructions anyone could follow if they were willing to admit the old version of themselves wasn't working anymore. Court petition, filing fee, copy of ID, background check, a few signatures, a hearing date. It was unsettling how easy it looked, like the state of Oregon had anticipated that people might occasionally want to become someone else without asking their parents for permission. I downloaded the form before I could talk myself into postponing it. The PDF opened, blank and clean, waiting for a name. Not the one I had. Not yet. The one I chose. I typed slowly, unsure if the keyboard would explode under the weight of the moment. Elena Grace Monroe. It wasn't symbolic. I didn't pick it because it meant something poetic. I picked it because it didn't belong to the Carter family. It didn't belong to the childhood I always felt erased from. It didn't belong to the sister who treated me like an optional extra in her highlight reel. And it didn't belong to the parents who consistently ranked my accomplishments somewhere between grocery errands and weather updates. It belonged to me. No negotiation required. The next morning, I went to the legal office on base, asked a few questions, and walked out with the same form and a clear sense of direction. Filing it felt clinical, rational, like updating a password you've been meaning to change for years. Nothing about it felt emotional, which surprised me. I thought I'd feel guilt or fear or at least some dramatic soundtrack rising in the background. Instead, it felt like tying your shoes before a run. You just do it, because of course you do. Once the petition was filed, everything moved in its own rhythm. I started the process of updating my military records, DFAS, medical files, training logs, base ID. Every department had a form, a checkbox, a digital line waiting for a signature. Bureaucracy turned out to be the most satisfying revenge I'd ever imagined. It wasn't designed to hurt anyone. It was designed to erase the parts that no longer fit. When I got to the emergency contacts section, the cursor blinked on a name I'd kept out of obligation more than trust. My mother's number. Under it, my father's, a lifetime of default settings staring back at me like they were waiting for justification. I deleted them. One tap each. No dramatic pause. Replace with none. The system accepted it without hesitation. The military didn't care who I was connected to. They only cared that the information was accurate. It was the first institution in my life that didn't try to guilt me into relationships that weren't working. After that, I updated everything else: email, mailing address, emergency notifications, even the nameplate on my gear locker. Watching the old name disappear piece by piece felt less like erasing myself and more like cleaning out a closet full of clothes I didn't fit in anymore. Necessary, practical, long overdue. My phone lit up constantly during that week, though I barely checked it. Missed calls from my mom. Voicemails that started polite and slipped into guilt. Texts from my dad asking why I was being distant, as if distance hadn't been the default of our relationship for decades. From Madeline, there were only 2 messages. The first was, "Are you mad we didn't come?" The second arrived hours later. "You're being ridiculous." I didn't answer either of them. Not because I was trying to punish anyone. Punishment implies they'd notice and change. This wasn't about them. This was about stepping out of a role they kept assigning me without my consent. As the name change moved along, my unit transitioned me to a new assignment in Oregon. It wasn't a dramatic relocation, just a shift toward work that aligned with my training and kept me far enough away from Nevada to make accidental run-ins statistically impossible. The orders came through faster than expected, and soon enough I was packing. The room looked bare within an hour. I'd never been someone who collected things. The only item I hesitated over was a small framed photo with Aunt Lorraine from a dinner years ago. I kept it. Everything else went into boxes or stayed behind. Driving north felt calm, nothing heavy, nothing dramatic, just long stretches of highway, and the realization that physical distance wasn't what separated me from my family. I'd been emotionally gone long before my car crossed the state line. When I arrived in Portland, the housing office handed me keys to a small apartment. Not impressive, not fancy, but it was mine. Every box I carried inside felt lighter than it should have, like the weight had been left behind somewhere around mile marker 423. I set the photo of Lorraine on the counter and brewed a quick cup of coffee. No ceremony, no big moment, just a quiet evening in a space that didn't contain any expectations except the ones I chose to bring with me. The city outside was unfamiliar, but it didn't press in on me the way home once did. The petition update arrived a few days later. Name change approved. I held the paper, crisp and official, with the state seal imprinted at the bottom. It wasn't a declaration or a rebellion. It was a confirmation, a recognition that I didn't need the Carter name to justify existing. I didn't need to keep playing the invisible sibling for people who never looked up long enough to see me. Folding the document and slipping it into a drawer felt like finishing a task, not like closing a chapter. Nothing ended. Nothing began. Things simply aligned in a way they hadn't before. And once that alignment clicked into place, every next step made more sense than the one before. The first real test of whether I meant what I wrote on all those forms came the day I powered on my old phone. I only turned it on because I needed to transfer some authentication codes, not because I was feeling nostalgic. The screen lit up like a slot machine, buzzing nonstop under the weight of missed calls and messages. 83 calls from my mother, dozens from my dad, a handful from Madeline, each one probably sent from the moral high ground she built out of thin air. I didn't open a single voicemail. I didn't need to. The previews alone told me everything I already knew. Where are you? This isn't funny. We need to talk. You can't just vanish. Call us back now. Don't do something stupid. They sounded less like people concerned for my well-being and more like customers upset that the store closed early. It was impressive. In a detached way, I'd changed my entire legal identity, moved states, and cut every last thread connecting me to them, yet somehow they still expected me to explain myself. That alone made turning the phone off again feel like maintenance, not avoidance. The new phone, the one with my new name on the account, sat on the counter in complete silence, exactly the way I wanted it. No history, no obligations, no years of accumulated expectations pinging through the speaker. Just a device waiting for the life I actually intended to build. Updating the rest of my digital world took a few days. Banking, insurance, work email, cloud accounts, social platforms I barely used. Every time I typed in Monroe, it landed with a weird sense of satisfaction, like labeling a drawer correctly after years of pretending random clutter belonged there. The hardest part wasn't learning to answer to the new name. It was realizing how fast the old one faded when no one around me insisted on using it. At my new assignment, the transition felt almost too smooth. My supervisor didn't ask for backstory. My team didn't ask for family background. In the military, you can show up with nothing but a duffel bag and a printed set of orders, and people will take you at face value because that's the only version they're entitled to. Introductions were simple. Major Monroe, welcome aboard. No one blinked. No one hesitated. No one paused long enough to ask who I used to be. Even the base admin clerk processed my paperwork with the efficiency of someone who had zero emotional investment in any of it. She stamped documents, updated the system, and handed me a new ID card. Everything's official now, she said. Great, I replied. And that was that. No fireworks. No questions. Exactly how I preferred it. Portland itself made it easy to blend into a quieter version of life. People mind their business here more than most cities. You can walk 3 blocks without making eye contact with anyone, which I count as a personal luxury. My apartment was small but bright enough in the mornings to feel like a new start without trying too hard. I bought a used couch, a dining table that wobbled slightly on one leg, and dishes that didn't match but worked just fine. The whole place looked like someone starting over intentionally, not dramatically. The only personal item that stood out was the photo of Aunt Lorraine I kept on my desk. In the picture, she was laughing at something I'd said during dinner, and even though I couldn't remember the joke, I remembered the feeling someone actually listening. The days settled into a steady rhythm. Briefings, maintenance reviews, paperwork, runs on the trail near base. My new team warmed up quickly. They liked that I didn't micromanage and didn't pretend to know everything. In return, they didn't pry into my life, which felt like a fair trade. When someone eventually asked if I had siblings, I said yes. When they asked what she was like, I said, loud, and they laughed because it sounded like a joke. I didn't correct them. Every so often, I'd get a notification from HR when someone attempted to access my old records. The system flagged each attempt as an unverified relationship, blocked it, and sent a generic alert to my new work email. The messages always said the same thing: emergency contact failed authentication. That phrase alone had more emotional accuracy than anything my family ever said to me growing up. My apartment manager called once, too. Your family's trying to reach us for a forwarding address, she said. Don't give it to them, I said. Oh, trust me, we don't give out anything without consent. She sounded amused, like she'd seen this kind of situation more than once. I didn't explain further. People always assume family dynamics make sense if you dig deep enough. In my case, digging would just uncover more layers of the same pattern. One night, I found myself sitting at the small table by the window with a stack of mail addressed to Monroe. It wasn't a ritual. I didn't light candles or reflect dramatically. I just noticed how simple it felt. No internal correction, no mental note to adjust. The name fit without effort. It belonged to the person who showed up for me, not the people who didn't. The strangest part wasn't the newness of it was the absence of conflict. I thought letting go of my family would feel like losing a limb, but it felt more like finally taking off a jacket that didn't fit. There was relief, not grief. Space, not emptiness. I didn't hate them. I didn't wish them harm. I just didn't need to carry the weight of their priorities anymore. When I updated my voter registration, I stared at the confirmation page longer than I meant to. Seeing Monroe attached to everything from my military status to my address made something settle inside me. It wasn't pride. It wasn't rebellion. It was recognition. I had stepped out of the Carter orbit entirely, and nothing catastrophic happened. The world didn't collapse. My life didn't unravel. No one showed up demanding justification. People simply accepted the version of me I presented. Cutting ties is often portrayed as this huge, dramatic rupture. For me, it was maintenance, like finally repairing something that had been broken for so long you forgot it was supposed to work differently. I didn't delete the old phone. I turned it off and put it in a drawer because getting rid of it felt unnecessary. The past can exist without being invited into the present. It can sit quietly on a shelf where it belongs, without leaking into places it has no business being. The drawer shut cleanly, and I didn't check the new phone for anything from home because there was nothing left for them to send. The silence didn't feel heavy or lonely. It felt accurate, like a system finally running without errors. And the more I settled into that accuracy, the more it became obvious that distance wasn't something I forced between us. It was something I finally stopped resisting. Settling into Portland wasn't some inspirational transformation. It was just practical. A new city meant no familiar routines, no old expectations, and no one waiting to compare me to a louder sibling. The first morning in my apartment, I made coffee in a mug that didn't match anything else in my cupboard and watched the street from my balcony. People walked dogs, biked to work, carried groceries, lived their lives without knowing or caring who I used to be. It was strangely grounding to be irrelevant in a place where irrelevance didn't hurt. Work at my new unit started quietly, which I appreciated. Introductions were straightforward. Responsibilities were clear. No one asked for a dramatic backstory or tried to decode the reason behind my transfer. Military life has plenty of flaws, but the one thing it's good at is accepting new arrivals without making a spectacle out of them. My commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harris, welcomed me with a handshake that lasted exactly 1 second longer than necessary, which is about as enthusiastic as officers get on a Monday morning. My team fell into a rhythm quickly. They were used to turnover and didn't treat me like a novelty. A few joked with me by the end of the week, which is usually a sign you're being integrated rather than tolerated. One airman asked if I'd always been this calm, which made me laugh because calm is what happens when you stop expecting chaos to explain itself. After work, I settled into routines that didn't require negotiating space with anyone. Grocery runs, evening walks, cooking meals without hearing someone shout down the hallway for me to help with whatever crisis Madeline had created that day. I didn't feel lonely, which surprised me. Solitude is only lonely when you aren't choosing it. I met Alex during my second week, a civilian analyst contracted to assist with logistics planning. He had the kind of dry humor people use when they've worked around the military long enough to understand its quirks, but not long enough to surrender their sanity. He introduced himself by saying, "If you ever need spreadsheets that look like they studied abroad, I'm your guy." I didn't know what that meant, but he seemed proud of it. We became friends in the loose, easy way adults sometimes do when they find someone who doesn't drain them. We'd grab coffee after briefings, argue about which food trucks were overrated, or make sarcastic observations about things no one else seemed to notice. He never asked intrusive questions, which made it easier to talk. He didn't know anything about my family, and I didn't volunteer details. The absence of curiosity wasn't dismissive, it was respectful. He treated the version of me standing in front of him as complete, not as someone missing chapters. The city helped with that feeling too. Portland has this way of letting you exist without insisting you impress it. You can be anonymous, eccentric, disciplined, exhausted, no one cares as long as you don't block the bike lane. I'd walk through local markets on weekends, pick up random produce I didn't know how to cook, and try new recipes that sometimes worked and sometimes produced smoke. When things burned, I opened a window and moved on. Simpler than trying to explain myself to people who weren't listening. One evening after a long shift, I sat on my balcony with a bowl of reheated pasta and noticed how quiet my phone had become. Not quiet as in muted after a fight, but quiet as in peacefully unused. There were no guilt-loaded messages, no dramatic paragraphs from Madeline pretending she was the victim, no backhanded compliments disguised as maternal concern, just notifications from work, a reminder to pay my electric bill, and the occasional meme from Rachel. The mental silence was new, not empty, clean. During my third week, the base HR sent another automated notification: emergency contact attempted access. Identity not verified. I didn't need to guess who it was. My mother had probably decided she deserved an update because she carried me for 9 months, as she liked to mention whenever she wanted credit for something she didn't do. The system did what it was supposed to do, protected the privacy of the person actually serving in uniform. There was no lingering guilt about it. If anything, it reinforced something important. Boundaries only feel dramatic to the people who benefited from you not having any. One afternoon, while sorting boxes I had avoided unpacking, I found a folder labeled Old Records. Inside was a mix of childhood report cards, a few certificates I never showed anyone, and a birthday card from Madeline that said, "You're all right, I guess," which was peak affection by her standards. I didn't feel sentimental. I didn't feel angry either. It all looked like paperwork for a life I'd finished a long time ago. I set the folder aside. My eyes drifted to the picture of Aunt Lorraine I'd already placed on my desk. Her smile in that picture wasn't loud or exaggerated. It looked steady, patient, like she knew something I didn't. Maybe she did. She always told me I'd figure out how to build a life that wasn't defined by what I lacked. A few nights later, I invited Alex over for dinner. He brought a salad no one asked for and complained that he'd followed traffic directions from an app that clearly hated him. We ate, swapped stories about strange moments from past assignments, and ended up talking about goals, the kind people don't usually say out loud because they feel too honest. I didn't mention my family, not because it was a secret, but because they weren't relevant to the direction things were actually heading. At work the next day, Rachel called me from her base in Nevada. "So," she said, "how's Oregon treating Major Monroe?" "It's quiet," I said. "You sound like someone who actually sleeps now." "I do," I said. "It's weird." She teased me for becoming emotionally stable, which she claimed was off-brand for someone in uniform. I told her to mind her business, which only made her laugh harder. It felt good, uncomplicated, normal in a way my life rarely was growing up. The days blended into something comfortable: steady work, predictable routines, friendships built on actual mutual interest instead of obligatory proximity. No guilt, no manipulation, no passive-aggressive commentary disguised as family bonding. And in the middle of all that normalcy, without any warning or dramatic cue, something shifted just enough to make me look twice. It wasn't tension. It wasn't fear. It was recognition, like my mind catching up to the fact that I had built a life on my own terms, and it hadn't collapsed under me. That quiet evening, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number, I didn't feel dread. I didn't feel anticipation. I just picked it up because it rang, not because it held any power over me. The unknown number turned out to be a hospital in Nevada. The nurse spoke in a calm, practiced tone, the kind people use when they have bad news on a script. She told me Aunt Lorraine had passed earlier that morning, peacefully, no pain. I thanked her, hung up, and sat still for a moment longer than I expected. Losing her wasn't a shock. She'd been in and out of treatment for months, but knowing she was gone left a hollow space that didn't come from grief alone. It came from gratitude too. She'd been the only person in my family who ever showed up without conditions. I booked a flight that night, not because I wanted to see anyone else, but because she deserved to be honored by someone who actually understood what she meant. Traveling back to Nevada felt different this time. No anxiety, no dread. More like returning to a place that used to matter but had long since stopped having any claim on who I was. The funeral home looked exactly like every funeral home I'd been in, which is to say uncomfortably neutral, like grief had been sanitized into a color palette. I arrived early again. I always arrive early. Showing up late is something you learn when you expect other people to wait for you. Showing up early is what you do when you've learned not to rely on anyone. The program they handed me listed my name correctly. Major Elena Grace Monroe. Not Carter. No asterisk explaining the change. Just the name I chose for myself, printed cleanly under immediate family. I ran my thumb along the edge of the paper, not for sentiment, but for certainty. Seeing the new name connected to a family event felt like watching two separate timelines intersect without fighting each other. My parents entered first. My mother spotted me before I even turned around. She froze again, same expression, same stiff inhale, same disbelief that I had followed through on something I'd said I'd do. My father stood beside her, rigid in a suit he probably only wore to weddings and tax appointments. They didn't walk toward me. They hovered, as if approaching required strategy. Madeline arrived a moment later, carrying herself like the guest of honor at a party she didn't plan but fully intended to dominate. Her eyes landed on me, then on the program in her hand, then back at me again. It was the exact expression she used when a restaurant ran out of her favorite appetizer, deeply offended, but pretending she wasn't. She marched straight over. "You seriously went through with this?" she said, shaking the program at me like it was a subpoena. I didn't bother pretending I didn't know what she meant. "That's my legal name," I said. She scoffed, the dramatic kind she'd perfected growing up. "You realize how insane this looks, right? You show up with a new name, act like none of us deserve to know anything." I cut her off gently. "I don't act like that. I just don't owe you a briefing on my personal choices." My mother stepped in. "Can we not do this here? This is a funeral." "Then stop bringing it to me," I said. I didn't start this conversation. That shut her up long enough for us to move into the chapel. I sat alone again, not out of rebellion, but because the distance was already there. They took their spots in the front row, clustered together like a tight little unit. I sat several rows back, close enough to hear the service but far enough to breathe. The officiant spoke about Lorraine's kindness, her dependability, her quiet strength. He mentioned how she always tried to reach the people who felt overlooked. My mother dabbed her eyes as if she had been the one Lorraine always supported, which almost made me roll mine, but I kept a straight face. A funeral wasn't the place to start rating people's performances. When the service ended, everyone drifted toward the exit in that slow, quiet shuffle funerals tend to produce. I stayed near the walkway, waiting for a moment when I could leave without being intercepted. The universe did not grant me that moment. My mother approached first. "Elena," she said, lowering her voice even though no one was paying attention to us. "We didn't know how to reach you. That's why we called the base. You didn't reach me because I removed you as contacts," I said. "On purpose," my dad frowned. "Why would you do that?" "Because emergency contact information is for emergencies," I said. "Not for phishing." He didn't have a comeback for that. Then Madeline stepped forward, arms crossed, brows lifted like she had finally decided to take charge of the narrative. "This whole thing is ridiculous," she said. "You're acting like the family never cared about you." I stared at her a moment, letting the silence work for me. "You scheduled your engagement party on the exact day of my promotion ceremony." She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, are we still on that? I didn't do it on purpose. You announced it the same week I sent the invitation. And you picked the one date I'd repeated for months. Well, excuse me for having a life. Not everything is about you." "No," I said. "That was the problem. Nothing ever was." Her jaw tightened, and for once, the confidence slipped. My mother jumped in again. "We made a mistake. We didn't realize it meant that much to you." I let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You didn't realize a military promotion mattered? Do you hear yourselves?" My father muttered something about miscommunication, which was his hobby whenever accountability threatened to enter the room. Madeline pointed at the program again. "And this name change? What's that supposed to be? Punishment? Some dramatic statement?" "It's not a statement," I said. "It's a boundary." "To keep us out?" she snapped. "To keep myself intact," I corrected. That stunned her into silence long enough for the breeze to pick up. My coat shifted slightly, brushing against my leg, and I could feel the weight of the moment settle, not heavy, not explosive, just solid. "You think changing your name fixes anything?" she said finally. "It doesn't fix you," I said. "It fixes my proximity to you." My mother shook her head in disbelief, but she didn't offer a counter-argument. Maybe she finally understood. Maybe she didn't. "It didn't matter," Madeline tried one more time. "So that's it? You just walk away?" End quote. "I already did," I said. "You're just seeing it for the first time." they didn't know what to do with that. For people who always controlled the script, losing the plot was unfamiliar territory. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt done cleanly, completely done. I stepped back, adjusted my bag on my shoulder, and headed toward the parking lot without needing to raise my voice or turn it into a dramatic exit. There was no satisfaction in hurting them. The satisfaction was in knowing their version of me wasn't the one running my life anymore. I didn't look over my shoulder as I reached the car, not out of spite. Out of certainty. Unlocking the car felt like shaking off a suit of armor I didn't remember putting on. The door clicked shut, and the quiet inside the cabin felt different from the silence in the funeral home. This one belonged to me. No one else was shaping it, breaking it, or filling it with expectations I never signed up for. I rested my forehead briefly against the steering wheel, not out of exhaustion, but because stillness finally made sense. Leaving the parking lot, I didn't replay the confrontation. I didn't rewrite the conversation in my head or imagine better lines. It sat exactly where it landed, clear, clean, unembellished. My family now knew who I was, not because I explained myself, but because I stopped performing the role they preferred. There was a strange relief in realizing they could no longer distort the narrative. When you stop giving people access, they lose the ability to misinterpret you for sport. The drive back to the airport was quiet. Nevada looked the same as it always had, which was almost comforting in a predictable way. Strip malls, gas stations, big skies, desert stretches, nothing had changed except my relationship to the place. It was no longer the background of every childhood memory. It was just geography. A spot on a map that didn't define anything except where I used to sleep. At the terminal, no one asked why I was flying alone. No one looked at my ticket and expected a backstory. The airline staff treated me with the same neutral efficiency they gave everyone else, which felt better than any attempt at sympathy. I found my seat, stowed my bag, and leaned back while the plane taxied. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking ahead to the next required explanation. I wasn't bracing for someone to comment on my choices or minimize something important to me. There was nothing to justify anymore. Landing in Portland felt like returning to a place calibrated to my frequency. The temperature was cooler, the air heavier with moisture, and the sky looked like it had 3 different weather ideas happening at once. Familiar, imperfect, manageable. I grabbed my bag, walked to the parking garage, and drove back to my apartment without overthinking anything. Routine can be its own kind of healing when you've spent years surrounded by chaos disguised as normalcy. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than I remembered, but in a good way. Contained. Personal. The framed picture of Lorraine sat on the desk exactly where I left it. Angled slightly toward the window, I took off my jacket, hung it over a chair, and stood there for a moment. Not out of confusion or hesitation, but because for once in my life, there wasn't anything looming behind the next step. I made tea, because coffee felt too sharp for the evening, and sat on the balcony while the city hummed in its low, steady way. People walked dogs, carried groceries, argued mildly about parking spots. None of it had anything to do with me, which is precisely what I liked about it. There's a certain freedom in living somewhere that doesn't expect a performance. You get to choose which parts of yourself you want to bring into the room. My phone buzzed once. A simple message from Rachel. "You good?" End quote. I typed back, "Yeah, I'm good." She didn't send follow-up questions. That's why she was the only one on my short list of people I didn't mind checking in with. A little later, I opened my laptop to clear a few pending tasks. Work requests, scheduling changes, a supply order that needed approval. The familiar structure of responsibility felt stabilizing. It reminded me that I'd built a life where competence mattered more than bloodlines. No one cared who raised me. They cared whether I could do my job. While sorting through email, I came across the scanned copy of my official name change document. I clicked it open, not because I doubted it, but because seeing the seal and signature on screen made something in me settle deeper. My new name wasn't symbolic anymore. It wasn't a temporary shield or an act of rebellion. It was administrative truth backed by law and reinforced by every system that mattered. I saved the document into a folder labeled Identity, which, for once, didn't feel dramatic. It felt organized, and when I closed the laptop, the room didn't feel heavier or lighter. It just felt accurate. Later that night, I sat on the floor beside a half-unpacked box I'd ignored for weeks. Not because I was avoiding it, but because it contained the few physical pieces of my past I hadn't decided how to deal with. Report cards, a medal from a volunteer program, a photo of me at 12 holding the science fair ribbon no one asked about. I sifted through it without any emotional spikes. The objects were harmless now, stripped of their old weight. History doesn't hurt when you stop giving it authority. I kept only one thing from the box, a small birthday letter from Lorraine. She'd written, "Don't confuse someone's silence for your lack of worth." I folded it carefully and placed it next to her photo. The rest went into a recycling bag without ceremony. I took the bag outside, dropped it into the chute, and walked back up the stairs, feeling lighter not metaphorically, but practically. Less clutter meant less noise, and I'd had enough noise in childhood to last 3 lifetimes. Back inside, I checked the time. Not because I was rushing anything, but because the day had moved in a way that felt smooth, intentional. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and got ready for bed with the quiet efficiency of someone who finally had control over her environment. When I lay down, the sheets felt cool and familiar, and my breathing settled without effort. There was no dramatic moment of revelation, no sudden rush of empowerment, just a steady, even recognition that walking away hadn't been a reaction, it had been the solution. The Carter family never saw me unless I stood exactly where they preferred. Leaving let me exist outside that narrow field of vision. Changing my name didn't punish them. It freed me from a definition they wrote without my consent. As I closed my eyes, the thought that drifted in wasn't profound or emotional. It was simple. Alignment feels better than approval, and living a life built on your own terms hits differently when no one's waiting to rewrite the narrative for you. Everything felt quiet in a way that finally made sense.